It had started out a Thursday. My boss, Mark, had an early meeting that morning, which meant I could count on a flurry of impossible tasks landing in my inbox the moment he returned. I'd barely walked through the door when that tickly feeling of foreboding settled over me. Subtle, just a hint, like when one enters a room where an argument has just taken place, the air carrying the weight of words unspoken. I slid into my cubicle, turned the monitor on. Immediately, an email popped up, flashing from Mark's account. Follow these rules exactly. My stomach twisted. No subject line. Just those words and a bulleted list that felt like instructions from some twisted game. I took a breath and forced myself to read them, each rule strange, each one adding to a sense of quiet dread that pulsed low in my gut. Rules. 1. At 3 p.m. and beyond, do not enter conference room B. 2. Between 3:33 and 4:44 p.m., do not answer calls from any number that you are not familiar with. 3. On the 3rd floor and beyond 5 p.m., do not use the mirrors. 4. If you see a person who looks exactly like you, do not interact or engage with them in any way. You should immediately leave the building and call security. 5. Leave the building at 6:06 p.m. I stared at the screen, feeling my pulse throb in my temples. 5 rules. 5 exact, silly rules. The words sounded nothing like Mark's clipped style. He wasn't the guy to send out some cryptic instructions. He was a bottom line, quarterly earnings kind of boss. This email, it just felt like a prank. But Mark didn't joke. Without realizing it, I'd been clenching my mouse tight enough that my fingers ached, forcing myself to breathe. I scanned the office to see if anyone else had gotten something weird. The norm. Lisa hunched over her computer screen, her headphones on. Nate and Mark chatting by the window. Abandoned, half-consumed mugs of coffee like some type of forgotten debris on desks. I almost heard in my brain Mark's voice, barking his constant refrain. Focus, productivity, profitability. And yet, here was this list. I thought about hitting the delete key, chalking it up as some hacker playing a prank or a weird phishing attempt. But something burrowed into my brain, a quiet, gnawing fear that wouldn't go away. Maybe that is what work does to a person over time. The late nights, the constant pressure, the deadlines stretch sanity to its limit. You start seeing things which are not there, the outlines of dark figures hiding just out of view. I had always taken pride in keeping it together, but the sense that something was amiss burrowed deeper with every glance at the clock, a ticking unease counting down to some inevitable endpoint. I clicked back into the email and read again and again over the rules this time, slowly, one by one. Conference room B after 3 p.m. I checked the schedule and saw the room was booked until 3:30. Mark himself had a meeting there at 3:15. Questions itched my brain. Had he forgotten his own schedule? Did he expect me to sabotage the room? But that didn't add up. These weren't the instructions of a man interested in maintaining the company's quarterly returns. Strange calls between 3:33 and 4:44. Then, the time frame was oddly peculiar, stretched out as if it had been selected for some sort of reason. The numbers themselves were also meaningless to me, but their precision felt purposive, almost ritualistic. I leaned back in my chair, battling the urge to simply hit delete on the damn email and go about my day. But something had shifted. I could feel it like a splinter buried deep under my skin. I ran my hands over my face, pressing my fingers into my eyes until spots danced in my vision. This wasn't normal. It was a joke, it had to be. But as the minutes ticked by, the realization that it wasn't a joke sank in. I pushed the thought aside, focusing my attention on the small mountain of files waiting for me on my desk. Mark didn't care if I lost my mind. Mark cared if the reports got done. The metrics, the numbers, the bottom line. Mark would haunt me to the grave if I didn't finish those. Yet, my gaze fell back onto the rules, inexorably pulled like a moth to flame. There was no use asking anyone else. I knew the type of people that worked here. Linear, buttoned-up citizens who lived and died by spreadsheets and fiscal quarters. If I were to walk up to Nate right at that moment and ask him whether the email was legitimate or not, he'd simply laugh and tell me to stop watching late-night horror flicks. I then forced myself back into my routine, hammering away at reports, data entries, numbers and figures swimming before my eyes. Hours passed in a blur. I barely noticed the time until my monitor clock blinked 2:59 p.m. When the clock struck 3, my chest constricted. I should avoid conference room B by now according to rule number 1, but my curiosity got the better of me. I told myself I'd steer clear of it, but this perverse instinct itched under my skin, begging me to go check and prove this was all a load of bullshit. So I stood up, just to stretch. I told myself. The heaviness of my legs was leaden as I moved, each step loaded with a kind of reluctance I couldn't shake. The hall down toward conference room B seemed darker, its fluorescent lights dimmed to some kind of sickly, off-white glow. I heard my own breathing, shallow and quick. Every exhale bounced off the silent walls. I rounded the corner and my steps slowed. The door to conference room B loomed in front of me, closed, the frosted glass blurring whatever might be inside. But there was movement, a shadow, indistinct and faint. My pulse quickened. No one should be in there. Mark's meeting wasn't until 3:15. The shadow shifted again, and I swore it turned toward me. I almost choked, scrambling backward before my brain could even register why. My heart slammed against my ribs, hands shaking as I forced myself to look again. But this time, the shadow was gone. The room seemed empty. The only movement, the faint shimmer of fluorescent light against the panes of glass. I laughed, or tried to. The sound strangled and wrong. Whatever I'd seen was just a trick of the light, a nervous hallucination. I walked back to my desk, the tension in my shoulders, the stiffness in my muscles. The air was heavier. It felt like, in the office, as if an unseen hand had pressed down on everything. For the next half hour, I buried myself in work, trying to drown the memory of that shadow, convincing myself it was just my overactive imagination. Then came 3:33 p.m. My phone buzzed on the desk, lighting up with an unknown number. The rules flashed in my mind like a neon sign. Do not answer any calls from unknown numbers between 3:33 p.m. and 4:44 p.m. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. It was just a call. Someone trying to sell me something, or maybe a scam. But my fingers itched to pick it up, the urge clawing at me, irrational but insistent. The buzzing stopped, putting me in a quiet, empty office. My breathing came out in shaky gasps. I thought I was safe, that whatever the email was, it had no hold over me. Then 2 seconds later, the phone lit up again. Another unknown number. It rang, each buzz tearing into my nerves, scraping across my skull. I grasped my phone and stared at the screen, knuckles whitening as I fought every urge to answer. When it finally stopped, I slammed the phone down, tightness in my chest loosening just enough for me to breathe. But the reprieve didn't last. 5 seconds later, it started ringing again, 3 times running, that same unknown number. I hadn't touched it, but its ringing burrowed into my brain. Each buzz pounded like a hammer. Sweat trickled down my face and merged with that dampening the shirt collar. The damn thing rang for a full minute before it stopped, just long enough for me to think it was done. Then it started again. My fingers twitched, itchy to pick up, just so it would stop, just to stop the incessant pounding against my skull. But I didn't. I couldn't. The rule had embedded itself too deep inside, like a thorn into my skin. I wasn't to answer anymore. It was only then, when the ringing finally died off completely, that a wave of relief hit me so strong, it bordered on comical. I inhaled deeply, letting it out again slowly, calming my frazzled nerves. Maybe that was it. Then, just some twisted coincidence, some kind of sick prank call at the perfect time to really mess with my head. I could have almost laughed. Then came the text message. The notification on my screen glowed. Unknown number. My hand trembled as I unlocked the phone, opening the message against my better judgment. Why didn't you answer? A wave of cold dread washed over me, freezing every thought. I looked around the office for some sign that all this was part of some elaborately concocted joke that one of my co-workers was hiding, snickering to himself while recording my reaction. But it was dead silent in the office, as hollow and still as a graveyard. Nobody was there. If anything, space was filled with the hum of an air conditioner, cold, aloof, and indistinct. Another message came up. You can't avoid me forever. My gut twisted, and the burning in my throat soured. I dropped the phone onto my desk as though it would scorch me. forcing myself to look away. My fingers ached from clenching at the edge of my desk, knuckles white, nails digging into the cheap laminate. Seconds ticked by, growing into minutes. I pushed myself to try and work to type to try and just block the thought from my head that I was being watched. Every word that came onto the screen blurred together, though, my thoughts splintering as fear gnawed away at my mind. I felt trapped, boxed in by the walls around me. My desk, the rule still haunting me like a ghost. At precisely 4:45 p.m., the phone buzzed once more. One notification displayed itself. Missed call, unknown number. It had been done. The window had closed. I stared at the notification, chest tight, my mind reeling. A wave of relief swept over. It was tinged by the acidic aftertaste of fear. Now, the rules had hold of me, real as the walls around me, real as the beads of sweat trickling down my neck. As I was packing up that evening, the last rule still was echoing in my head. Leave the building by 6:06 p.m. My gaze fell upon the clock, and an irrational panic flared as I saw the time. 5:57 p.m. I didn't waste a second. I snatched my stuff up and practically ran for the elevator, mashing the button repeatedly until the doors finally opened. They were closing behind me when I saw in the mirror what I still couldn't quite explain was different. The doors slammed shut, clamping me into the minute space. The mirror reflected me pale and shaken, eyes darting to the corners of the elevator. The mirror felt too close, the reflection too sharp, as if it were staring at me as much as I at it. The elevator purred softly, floor after floor falling behind. I exhaled a shaky breath, counting down the numbers until we reached the ground. But when the doors opened, a cold realization hit me. The mirror in the lobby was just there, right across from the elevator, and in its reflection, I didn't move. It just froze, staring, one arm raised like it reached to grab me. I stepped back from the mirror over the lobby. My heart pounded in my chest. My reflection didn't budge, staring back with an expression not quite mine. My eyes were colder, sharp as glass shards, their gaze hollow, almost hungry. I made myself look away, stumbling toward the exit. My hands struggled against the glass door, the night air beyond tugging at me like a lifeline. Then, with a sharp shove, I was out into the evening chill, every nerve in my body still bristling. The streets were empty. Only the hum of distant traffic and the faint buzz of streetlights broke the silence, as if even the city itself had turned its back on me. I stood there sucking in deep breaths, fighting the urge to look back at that building, feeling that strange weight still pressing on me, heavy and oppressive. When my heartbeat steadied, I reached into my pockets and started walking head down, going with a blind urgency. A 10-minute walk was what it took from the office to my apartment, but tonight each block stretched endlessly, contorting the path into something alien and hostile. The shadows seemed to crawl in my peripheral vision, sliding along cracked pavements, whispering just beyond my line of sight. When I finally reached my building, my hand shook as I fumbled with my key. The lock clicked, and I stepped inside, slamming the door shut behind me. In the poor light of my apartment, the walls were close, their pale color reflecting an unnatural glow. My nerves tingled, every sense heightened, as though reality had been distorted, each detail etched with razor precision. I collapsed onto the couch, my body sinking into the worn cushions. I pulled out my phone, meaning to check my emails, to see if Mark had followed up, if anyone else had noticed anything strange, but my inbox was as silent as the grave. I clicked over to the call log, finding only that single missed call from earlier, a tiny digital scar mocking me with its simplicity. I scrolled through my phone, and it froze on that moment. The screen went bright red with one single and same notification, unknown number. I stared at it, every muscle taut. This was impossible. The calls weren't supposed to come after 4:44 p.m. I'd followed the rules. My finger hovered over the screen, hesitation digging its claws into me as the seconds ticked by. The phone buzzed again, the number glowing on the screen, insistent, relentless. Against my better judgment, my thumb reached for and hit the answer button. I put the phone against my ear and a dull static crackled from the speaker. I waited, my breath caught in my throat, listening for any sign of voice, some inkling of what kind of prankster or crazed mind was behind the call. Then came the whisper. Faint, barely a murmur, but unmistakable. You broke the rules. My blood turned cold. All my muscles contracted when those words seemed to congeal in my brain. I had an overwhelming urge to throw the phone, sever the connection with whatever waited on the other end. But I couldn't. My hand was glued to the device, frozen in a death grip. You should have listened. The voice hissed, its voice as smooth and hollow as a breath slipping through rotten teeth. I squeezed my eyes shut, fingers closing on the phone until they hurt. Who the hell are you? Silence. A silence that was almost deep enough that I thought my eardrums would burst, and the lack of sound crawling into my brain, filling every empty space with that sickly crawling dread. I opened my eyes and looked around, half expecting to see something in the room with me, watching and waiting. The line crackled again, then a sound slid through the speaker, a soft, disturbing noise, like a hissing whisper combined with the faint rasp of fingernails down wood. Did you see it? The voice whispered. Did you see yourself? I swallowed, throat dry as sand. My mind flashed to the mirror in the lobby, to the reflection that hadn't moved, to the cold, hungry stare that wasn't my own. You looked away. It continued, the shade of dark amusement coloring every word. You shouldn't have looked away. The phone clicked, the line going dead, leaving only the eerie hum of silence. I dropped the phone, let it fall to the floor, as though it was cursed, as though the plastic of the device itself had absorbed something malevolent. My hands were shaking, my pulse racing, each heartbeat a deafening thud in the silence of my apartment. I wanted to think it all was some sort of crazy joke, a prank that had gotten out of hand. But deep inside, I knew better. The rules now resided in my brain, the weight of them pressed upon my skull, each a warning, a reminder of unknown boundaries that somehow I'd crossed. A noise came from the hallway outside my apartment, a faint dragging sound, heavy and deliberate. My body went rigid, every nerve alight. My senses strained to pick up each subtle scrape. The sound grew louder, inching closer with a slow torture that stretched each second like a blade against flesh. I held my breath, ears straining as the noise stopped directly outside my door, smothering, like mud, clogging the air, and beneath, something waiting. I thought of calling the cops, but my phone was still lying on the floor, and besides, what the hell was I going to say? The silence deepened, pressing in on me, suffocating. Then, just when I thought it would never break, a single, deliberate knock broke the quiet. I clamped my hands over my mouth, stifling a whimper, my whole body paralyzed. It came again, louder this time, like a demand, cold and insistent. It didn't sound human, more like something that was merely mimicking the action, imitating what it thought a knock should be. With the third knock, something inside me just seemed to break. I made myself shift, slowly rearward from the door, backward toward the window. My fingers found the edge of the glass. I pulled it open, hoping I would be able to escape. The sound of that latch snapping free echoed through the room loud as a gunshot. The knocking ceased. I froze, waiting and listening, while the silence fell like dust. In a moment I dared to look back at the door, cold dread building in my stomach as something dark seeped beneath the frame. It slid forward, a thick black ooze welling across the floor, its edges pulsing with a sickly, unnatural glow. I stumbled backward, my heart a wild, erratic drumbeat, and in an instant, I slipped out the window, landing hard on the fire escape. I scrambled down the metal steps, not caring about the noise, only knowing I had to put as much distance between whatever the hell was in my apartment and me as I possibly could. I burst onto the street, gasping for breath in uneven sobs, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The city sprawled around me, bright and indifferent, unconcerning its bedlam with whatever horrible things that would lurk in the shadows. I tried to steady myself, clutching the rim of a streetlight, the cold metal grounding me, anchoring me to reality. But the feeling didn't last. A shadow shifted at the edge of my vision, just beyond the reach of the streetlight's glow. I spun around, wide-eyed, scanning the empty street. There was nothing, just the faint hum of the city, the distant murmur of traffic, the dim glimmer of streetlights painting the pavement in muted, sickly tones. And yet, somewhere in those shadows, it watched me, I walked down the street, my legs moving of their own volition. None of it mattered anymore. My apartment, my life, all those things that used to make me feel safe. The rules aren't just inside my head. They're alive, sewn into the very fabric of my reality. I walked and my mind raced with every step, as if I was being followed, hunted, pulled into some kind of twisted game that I couldn't understand. City lights flickered. Shadows deepened in ways that didn't make sense. Darkened buildings loomed over me, their windows staring down in silent witness to my desperation. My footsteps echoed off an empty street, too loud, too alone, until they ceased to blend into the background, became something else. A deliberate, controlled beat just behind me. I spun around, and for a split second, I caught sight of a figure at the edge of my vision. It was standing beneath a broken street lamp, half hidden in darkness, its form still and unnatural, like a statue waiting to be noticed. My heart leapt to my throat, my stomach turning as I saw it, and knew it was me, an exact replica, down to the rumpled clothes and the terrified, hollow expression. My reflection, it cocked its head, its lips twisted into a hollowness of a grin, and something inside of me shifted. A wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. I backpedaled, my hand searching for anything that could be used as a weapon, but there was nothing, just the empty street opening up around me with no sanctuary. My reflection took another step forward. I turned and ran, my legs burning as I sprinted down the road, refusing to look back. I couldn't bear it. That twisted version of myself, a hollowness draped in my skin. I ran across crossroads, darting through alleys, the well-known cityscape warping around me, every corner seeming sharper, more hostile. It was as if the city itself was conspiring to keep me trapped. I didn't stop running until I reached the bridge at the edge of downtown. Panting, I bent over the railing, my eyes fixed on the dark waters below, distorted. The reflection on its surface was broken by ripples that danced in the dim glow of far-off streetlights. But while I stared, the water stilled and smoothed into a perfect mirror. My reflection stared back. It stared back, that other version of me, staring with a gaze that burrowed deep in my mind. "You know what you have to do," it whispered, the words slithering through my mind like some venomous snake, wrapping around my thoughts, tightening second by second. The rules played one by one in my mind, each a warning, each attached to something terrible that I couldn't quite grasp. Above them all, the final rule loomed. You must leave by 6:06 p.m. I looked down at my watch, 6:01 p.m. Panic swelled through me as the seconds slipped by, ticking down to something that felt far worse than death. Why? I spat into the darkness, my voice barely more than a whisper. Why are you doing this? The reflection's lips twisted, parting into a smile that was all wrong, too wide, too sharp, like it had been carved into flesh instead of formed by muscles. Because you broke the rules. The words were echoes in my mind, rippling through my thoughts and warping reality, because unraveling the city around me had to be some sort of metaphor. Streetlights sputtered into life, casting unnatural, erratic shadows that shifted and grew to writhe like grasping fingers, bending into impossible angles. Every instinct was drumming its heels in my brain, screaming for me to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The rules had been clear, and I'd broken them. The consequences closed in, drawing tighter, like a noose slipping around my neck. I stumbled backward, my vision blurring as the world went in and out of focus. Buildings melted into dark shapes, the streets dissolving into shadows. The only thing left was that awful reflection in the water, its eyes on me, eyes far too empty, too knowing. You cannot run forever. It whispered, the words sinking into my mind like water, filling every corner with crawling, inescapable dread. The rules will follow you. They always do. I scanned around, searching for some sign, some way out. But the city had turned on me, every street, every corner twisted into something hostile, unfamiliar. I stepped back from the water, grasping for the railing with white-knuckled hands, like I could hold myself in place, keep myself from slipping into whatever nightmare waited for me beyond the rules, until there was a sudden cut in the silence with a sound, the buzz of my phone. One note, sharp and slicing through the oppressive quiet. I pulled it from my pocket, hands shaking as I looked down at the screen. Unknown number. My throat clutched, and my fingers shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. I didn't want to answer it, but some type of sick instinct was forcing me to, made me lift the phone up to my ear. The line crackled, and the same voice whispered through the static, softer this time, like a gentle lullaby laced with venom. "There is one last rule," it said, words that wrapped around me like chains. "If you want to survive, you have to listen." I swallowed, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" The voice on the other end chuckled, a low, hollow sound that sent chills racing down my spine. "Go to the last place you felt safe," it whispered, its tone seeping with satisfaction, with certainty. "And wait." The line went dead, and I was plunged into silence. I let the phone slip from my fingers, heard it crackle as it hit the pavement. Then I was turning and running backward, my mind frenzied in thoughts. The last place I felt safe. I knew where that was. I had known it from the moment the rules first arrived in my inbox, each one a test, a trap. My office. I turned back, with a bitter sense of inevitability. The city sprawled out before me, dark and indifferent. The journey back felt endless, each step weighted down by a crushing dread that grew heavier with every block. By the time I reached the building, I was hollow, my mind scraped raw, every nerve dulled and exposed. I stepped inside. The familiar walls closed around me, silent and still. The place felt abandoned, as though I was walking through the ruins of my own life. I made my way to my cubicle, each step slower, heavier, until I was finally there, sinking into my chair, my body sagging with exhaustion. The clock on my monitor sprang to life. 6:06 p.m. The building seemed to shudder. A soft, ominous humming vibrated through its walls. The light would flicker, casting shadows that twisted and stretched, writhing like something alive. It was then that my reflection stared back at me from the darkened monitor screen, its eyes glinting with a hollow, mocking amusement. "You're home," it whispered, a faint smile curving across its lips, and the walls around me began to close in.